All right, welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. Well, this week's show is going to be fun. We got some important things to say, and we got some important things to share. Let's talk about fishing report. Well, the warm weather, again, has created warmer waters. So if you want to catch some fish, depending on what you want to catch, you're going to have to go different ways. So warm water fish, which are going to be your crappie, your perch, and your panfish, as well as your bass, they're going to be hitting high. Now the panfish go 5-6 feet below the surface. They're suspended. So use a small jig and a little bit of power bait or a little bit of worm, and start pulling them in. As for the bass, oh my goodness, I am catching topwater fish. Use a popper, a whopper plopper, a spook, or even a wake bait. All those things are getting fish. I was out the other day and I could not tell you how many fish I caught. Also, for your trout, I saw them at 35 to 40 feet deep over at Lake of the Woods. Go deep and go slow. Use a slide weight. Use 3 to 5 foot leader and some power bait, and just sit there and wait for them to hit. Do not forget to give them some slack. Do not keep a tight line on that hook. Let them run with it, because if they feel that resistance, they're going to let loose of it. So again, go deep, go slow, 3 to 5 foot leader power bait, and just read a book and wait for them to hit. So this week we are getting all sorts of good warm water fishing. This is a great time to go out to the lake with your family and just enjoy it. So please leave the area cleaner than you found it. And don't forget to go to my YouTube channel, Terrible at Fishing. Now, let's get on with our show. All right, welcome back to Terrible at Fishing with Ken and Michael. So I thought I'd start off today with we're going to talk about our favorite baits this time of year, how to fish them. Really, baits 101, fishing 101 this week. But I want to talk about a little bit of something that has been going on at Lake of the Woods for years, and they've been trying to get approval for a disability ADA fishing dock, and it's been going on for years. Originally, this dock wouldn't have cost a whole lot of money, but because of the years it has taken for them to get approval, which they still have not got, it is now more than 5 times the cost of putting in this dock. And this they had to put in an ADA path, in which they have done in order to get approval, but they still can't get approval. I came from Santa Clarita, and at Castaic Lagoon they had an ADA fishing dock, and it was great because veterans that are disabled, people who couldn't get on boats, couldn't get to the shore, were in wheelchairs, they got to enjoy fishing. I don't understand why this is such a difficult thing to get approval for, but they have to go through ODFW and the National Service, Forestry Service, which is the Department of Interior, but they also need people in the local community to come together. And Ken, you've had some experience with some of this. What's your opinion?
Yeah, it's actually Forest Service, Department of Agriculture, and we're talking about NEPA, National Environmental Policies Act. And you're right, the simple projects that shouldn't cost a lot of money, when you add environmental compliance planning costs, are exacerbated substantially. That's the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. I think ODFW would be pretty supportive of something like this, but they're not going to be able to fund anything that doesn't have environmental compliance approval. And so the district ranger for that district, which I don't have that information handy, is the responsible official and the deciding official who would sign a NEPA document It probably shouldn't be something overly complicated as far as the environmental impact. It should be relatively uh, little impact, so a categorical exclusion of some sort. But it really comes down to the risk tolerance of the deciding official. If that person or their chain of command were hearing from the user group, from their constituents in the community, that this is something they want to see, then their tolerance risk is going to be much higher, right? Because the risk then becomes having a dissatisfied constituency. So if people want to see something like this happen, about the best thing they could do is reach out to the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest and let them know that they want to see this occur, and that might get them to move. The Forest Service in general is significantly challenged by hiring issues right now. They went to a centralized hiring process. Here in California, they're on a total hiring freeze and have been off and on for years now. That means that anytime a position is vacated, that they cannot refill that position permanently. So I would be willing to bet that lacking personnel is part of the reason this can't get moved along. The other would be risk tolerance. So again, if you want them to prioritize projects like this, they need to hear from you.
Well, you got what's different too at Lake of the Woods is you got a managing company, that manages that area, which is Lake of the Woods. I forgot the name, their official name, but I'll put all that down on the rebroadcast on my Terrible at Fishing channel in the details below. But they would help with an ADA dock. And an ADA dock would allow also for, it's just, I'll tell you, when I was paralyzed and I wanted to go fishing, I had to use the ADA dock and fishing dock down in Castaic Lagoon, and I could barely move, could barely talk, which for some people that was a blessing. That I could barely talk. But it was really nice that I could at least get out there and cast and get, something, get a line in the water, because it's therapy. And I know that fishing is more than just fishing. It is therapeutic. And if we can get more people out there, I would love to have an ADA tournament at Lake of the Woods, and it would be, or anywhere for that matter. But Lake of the Woods is a very popular resort here, and I just, for years they've been trying to get this thing done. And I was talking to George Gregory, which is one of the owners at Lake of the Woods, and he's gotten some approvals for other things they want to do. And I asked him, what about the ADA dock? He goes, well, that's still up in the air, Mike. We just haven't got a whole lot of people to endorse it. And somebody actually was against it and wrote a lengthy letter. And because they're worried about what you were saying, environmental impact, the Lake of the Woods, because it's an HOA, because of the people living on it. They were worried about, give me a break. Every one of those owners have a dock. Every one of them has a dock. You think that actually, some of those docks are in horrible disrepair. Some of them are free floating out there. And they're worried about an ADA dock, one that is professionally built, one that is, that can be maintained by the resort. And they're worried about that. That just drives me nuts. Because I shoot those docks all the time. And some of them are disgusting. So they're worried about that. I have my 2 cents to say some of those. Whoever that person that wrote that letter, I want to cast it. I want to cast a line right on their shin.
I was mistaken, Mike, about it's actually the Fremont-Winema
Yeah.
not the Red River Siskiyou. My apologies. So if people want to make themselves heard, you can call 541-947-2151. That's the headquarters office. That's the Klamath Ranger District out there. If I'm not mistaken, again, 541-883-6714. Those folks need to hear from you. Like
Yep.
you said, they're hearing from the opposition, but they're not hearing. It's often that way where Forest Service or other agencies hear from people who are against stuff. You hear the term NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? It's a great idea, but I don't want to have to look at it.
They're
There's ones
beautiful
that
dogs.
this comes back for me to what we've been talking about the last couple weeks about how crowded Lake of the Woods can get. And so my concern for an ADA dock would be safety for the users. And it would have to be a substantial design. It would come with extended no wake zone of some sort. And the one of the time before last, I was out fishing at Lake of the Woods in our 14-foot John boat. I didn't feel safe with the boats blasting around. I bet you there were 200 boats on that little lake, and
Wow.
some of them, 50 miles an hour at times. And they got to take that. The NEPA planning process is not just about environmental impact, although that's its foundation. It's also about things like safety and cost and economic impact, home, landowner impact or homeowner impact, that kind of thing. Those cabin owners, they all have an agreement with the Forest Service. Every single one of them has some sort of a permit in order to have private building on federal property. And so, another way to engage in stuff like this for public users of these kind of public spaces is through those processes. Every one of those permits needs to be updated on a regular basis. And so if the private cabin owners are hindering public access substantially, a group, even a small group of boisterous individuals bringing that to the attention of the Forest Service could go a long way.
Yeah, I agree. And I can't think of a better thing to have at every lake than to have an ADA, a disability, to accommodate the disabled. Um, who needs therapy the most? It's the
Yes, sir.
disabled. Yeah, they just need it. And when I needed it the most, I had it locally, not far from my house. It was like 25 minutes from my home. Because I lived in Canyon Country at the time. But this is mental health at its best, and I just don't understand anybody who would push against it, especially when you see Lake of the Woods and you see all those other docks out there. I mean, this would be a beautiful professional dock, and you talk about wakes, you could make Rainbow, because they want to put it in Rainbow Bay and by the main marina, main boat ramp, and you can just make the entire Rainbow Bay, no wake. I mean, it's not that big of a bay, and they can just make the whole Rainbow Bay. I mean, I used to fish Pyramid Lake over on the Grapevine, which is a very big lake and tons of places, and it's 200, 300 feet deep. And that lake had whole coves that were no wake. Well, stay tuned for our next segments. We're going to talk about our favorite baits and how we fish in this time of year. So stay tuned to Terrible at Fishing here on Gold Country Radio. All right, welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. So now that I've been able to give my 2 cents about American with Disabilities Act on fishing docks, let's talk about fishing. So I went fishing yesterday, Lake of the Woods, because that's where I go. Water 75 degrees. And, this time of year, I go topwater. And I was using a popper on my BFS, my bait finesse system, just a tiny little popper. And I lost track at how many fish I caught. I mean, 50, 60. I have no idea. I have no idea how many fish. I had to keep one of my bass. It was a 2-pounder because he swallowed my popper. And I could not remove the popper without serious damage to that fish. And I only keep fish I damaged. But he was over 2 pounds. And when I cleaned him, 2 full-size large crawfish came out of him. They were dead. But this guy was just swallowing anything he could get his mouth around. And 2 large crawfish come out of this largemouth bass. So I was like cleaning them, and I at first it scared me. I'm kind of a wuss. And I pulled him out, and I was like, what the world is that? And then I'm just continue cleaning. And then another one popped out, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. I mean, we don't have that many crawfish at Lake of the Woods. I mean, we have them, but this beast found them. So, I dropped off a reorder of baits at Lake of the Woods Marina yesterday, and I gave them 4 very, very cool crawfish. It's a 3-piece, very complicated bait to make and to build because it requires 5 split rings. It requires eye screws. It's a very complicated bait. In fact, I know nobody can see this, but this is just the body of one. And they are, they're just hard. And I'm thinking, what a great bait. After I clean that largemouth, what a great bait. And it's more of a river bait, because you use it in a river. That bait is going to kill. But you fish differently than I do because I love hard baits. And I do mold very large swim baits. But in fact, this 7.5-inch, I have a 7.5-inch wake bait I use a lot, and just gets great results at Lake of the Woods. But Ken, you're different, and I envy people who can use soft plastics because I'm lousy. I mean, terrible at fishing. Should say terrible at soft plastic fishing. I should modify it because I'm really good at hard baits, but I'm terrible at soft plastic fishing. You're not.
Yeah. I want to start off by saying around here, in my experience, we call them crawdads, so that'll get you Klamathified a little bit.
Oh, crawdad. Well, crawfish,
yeah.
crawdads. I don't know. I mean, they look like little lobsters. I mean,
yeah,
basically,
and they taste like little lobsters too. They got their own. We do quite a bit of trapping of crawdads in the Williamson River, and had a number of feeds. Kind of Cajun style, where you just dump it out on the table. That's one of my favorite things to do. And we can pull the tail off of a crawdad and use that where bait's allowed, and do really well on it. The hard plastic crawdad lure you build, which is really impressive, by the way, is available in just about any store by Daredevil or other makers, and they're difficult because they're floating lures, and like we've talked about in the past, the fish are usually down. The big ones are down in the bottom where the cover is, or otherwise kind of hiding from aerial predators and such. And
these died.
Yeah, and
really slow retrieve on these guys.
The bill will deflect off of cover too, and if you can get that thing to hit a rock or a stump just right, that's usually when you're going to get a bite. And I was surprised that you said it was a largemouth because I was almost sure you were going to talk about a smallmouth because often, a largemouth or smallmouth bass and crawdads are obligate. If you're finding a lot of smallmouth, you're probably going to find some crawdads in that water body. And there's times when that's all they eat across the country. That being said, there is really not a forage base that you can't imitate with soft plastics. And in that case, then you're not worried about having to reel to get it to dive. So when you cast that hard plastic bait out and it's floating on the surface, you start reeling. You got 3 or 4 feet before it gets into the strike zone. And so you need to cast beyond your target and reel down so that it's in the strike zone when it gets to where you think the fish are. With a soft plastic, not only do you have the ability to just let it sink and fish it dead, but then you can rig it weedless and other styles so you can run it through that brush where those fish are without having to hang it up. We're having to worry about hanging it up and or fish in lily pads and weeds and stuff like that. And a soft plastic crawdad imitation is probably going to cost you in the realm of $2 to $3, and a hard plastic crawdad imitation is going to cost you in the realm of $8 to $20.
Yeah.
And so again,
yeah.
So in that again, that's in the thought process of being able to put the lure where the fish like to hide for less fear of losing it because it didn't cost you quite as much money.
Yeah. I actually have this thing called the lure retriever. It's kind of a lead weight that slides down your line with dangling chains, and you can catch your lure and pull it out of the the wood or whatever it's stuck in. You'll bend your hooks, but you don't lose your bait. So, but this one, I also, what do you, when it comes to soft plastics, I gotta fish more with them, but I get so impatient with myself because I know if I throw this rod, I'll catch a bass in 5 minutes. But so bass fishermen are not known for patience. Where trout fishermen, you guys throw out a trout fisherman will throw out his power bait and drink a beer, and then look out there, and then the trout's hitting the surface. Well, bass fishermen are not like that. So I made these things called dancing bones, and look at that thing. And oh my goodness, a dancing bone lure is or soft plastic looks like something out of the movie Aliens, and it's nothing but movement, but they don't last very long. So because it got such a small spine to them. But I do hook it up weedless, and the dancing bones were so expensive, so I bought the mold and I started molding my own. It's just cheaper because these are $3.50 by the manufacturer each, and they only catch about 2 or 3 fish, but they catch. But this one thing I've noticed about soft plastics, you need them to move, and so this one's got probably the most movement because each piece of the lure just flutters in the water naturally. And when you use a soft plastic like a craw, you're basically looking at tentacles and tail that actually will move with the water current. So in order to get the fish's attention. So when you throw out, let's say, a craw in a soft plastic, do you swim it or do you just do you use it sort of like a Ned where you let it fall onto the floor of the lake or the river and let it sit there for a while? How do you fish it?
Yeah, everything. So it depends on how you're throwing it. So I'm a big fan of just a wide set or wide gap offset weedless hook with no weight. And in that case, that's when I like those salt impregnated baits because they hold a little water and add some weight to it, and then they have close to neutral buoyancy. So even those stick baits, that action you're talking about, a pencil bait, like a Senko, it has 2 actions. It kind of wobbles up and down, and then it kind of floats as it sinks from side to side. So it has
Right.
two natural actions built in, and then anything you can impart with your line. And that would go for just about any soft plastic you use. And so you can throw it on a jig head and kind of pop it off the bottom through the brush like that, like any other jig, or run it without any weight, and then you run it as a surface bait if you want, or let it fall down through the weeds, and sometimes just sitting still, or a little bit of a twitch, a jiggle in there without really moving the bait is what it will take. And so that's one of the things I like about soft plastics. You put on one hook and you try a number of different, shapes, sizes, and colors. And if none of that works, you try a different hook and go back through those shapes, sizes, and colors. Add some weight to it. Uh, Change up your presentation. It's just, in my experience, the soft plastics have a lot more variability in how they can be presented than hard lures in general. And it really comes down to, like I said before, how you hold your mouth, what you're doing with the lure at any one time. Uh, it can be fished in just any number of ways, and that could be what triggers the bite. You just gotta mix it up.
Yeah. Usually if I use soft plastics, I usually Texas rig it where the weight is actually close to the bait itself. But there's also a Carolina rig, which allows a leader from the bait or from the weight to the bait itself. So usually, and that allows you to cast it out there, but allows that bait to freely fly through the water, or to raise above the floor a little bit, and to give that a little bit of life, which Carolina rigging is really I guess it was invented in Carolina, north or south, I don't know. But the Carolina rig is actually a really neat way to swim or to let a bait do that. Now, I thought about adding salt to my my baits, but I use I use a sinking plastic emulsion when I mold it, but I can also use what's called a feather light, which is a floating plastic, which would, if you were to use a Carolina rig, my baits would float above the weight. I never really thought about using the feather light. What do you think? You think that would be cooler if you were to
Yeah,
Carolina rig it, would float above it?
yeah, yeah. I could see that. I don't use that rig. I seldom attach a weight to the line. I like a weighted jig head if I need weight,
Yeah.
and I like to keep the bait close to the bottom. And I'm going to avoid weight at all costs. It just takes a snag free presentation and makes it a little more snaggy when even if you have
Yes.
it rigged weedless. If that weight gets wedged between rocks, especially when you're chasing smallmouth, you'll lose more baits with weight. And I find that I catch more fish when I fish without weight. And if I am going to add weight, I want it to be right down there by the hook, so I'm in control of it, because it just adds more potential to get snagged up and lose your gear.
Well, that was pretty interesting. I know you're learning something. So stay tuned, because we're going to pick up this conversation. We're going to learn about what I do in order to avoid those snags. So stay tuned. All right, welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. Yeah, because I used to do a lot of Texas rigging, I've started using weighted hooks, and just a 1/8 ounce or 1/16 ounce weighted hook, with this skin hooking the tip,
Yep.
which makes it completely weedless. It allows me to still have a little bit of weight to get it casted out there, but also makes it completely weedless, coming back. So I don't have that extra weight on the
Yep.
line to get
Yep.
caught in rocks and debris.
Yep. And to nick your line and cause a weak spot.
Mhm.
And then when you're talking about weighted hooks, you got choices there too, right? So
Lots of them.
the kind of weedless wide gap offset where the weight is actually on the shank of the hook, where
Exactly.
it brings that weight right down to the middle of your bait, versus something that's weighted at the eye of the hook, where it's more the head of the bait that's weighted. Completely different presentation, same bait, looks a lot different to fish.
Right. Well, the one at the head would probably be more of a swim bait type of configuration, where a weighted hook on the shank, which is usually what I use, that unless I'm using like a grub or something like that. But the on the shank itself, those are designed, because I like the gamakatsus and the owner beast hooks on the bigger stuff. That allows that center weight, and you're able to swim it through or just let it sink, but just enough to get it out there. Typically, I don't go over an eighth of an ounce on my weighted hooks, depending on the size of the bait or plastic I put on it. But you're right. That is really one of my favorite weedless. I could take it and swim it through anything, and it's just a completely better presentation.
Yep. Yeah, I've been messing around with the Z-Man products lately, and I really like that guy. He's just hilarious on his fishing show. He's all about smallmouth, But
Yeah.
those baits, they're soft rubber, but they're so resilient. You cannot break them by stretching them out. And you can throw one of those jerk baits or swim baits on one of these weighted hooks, and then tag that tip back in to make it weedless, and keep leaving on your lure everywhere you go. It'll withstand the heat. It doesn't fall apart like a Cinco, and it just has that kind of unique presentation that other people aren't throwing. I've really had some good luck with the Z-Man products for bigger fish, big bait, big fish.
Yeah, they're Elastec, which is that really
Sure.
stretchy stuff, allows it to endure multiple bites. Although, do not okay, put it in with other bait, other
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
plastics,
yeah, yeah. Good
because
point.
they will mold. They will mold into one big giant Elastec.
That's right. That's right.
Um, I, and
You're
that's one
better
of the
off leaving
things.
it on your hook than throwing it back in your tackle box when you're
Yeah,
done
don't do
with
that.
it.
Because I actually had faith in those, and then I look at my tackle box after a summer, and it's like, what in the world is that clump? But I
Yeah, we've
like,
all done that.
yeah, I like Elastec. There's another company for finesse plastics called Mule Fishing, like the animal, and Mule Fishing for very small finesse stuff. His stuff is like Elastec; it just pulls and stretches and will endure multiple bites. And that's kind of what when I create a plastic, I want durability and won't melt. And because people pay a lot of money for my hand painted baits, and last thing I want is for it to become a pool inside their box. And so my plastic, you'd have to get it to 300 degrees for it to melt. Um, and that's a nice thing about them. Although, just like any plastic, when I skin hook it, that hole will start to get worn up, and so you might want to flip it and use the other side on some of the baits. On my swim baits, you can't do that, so then you just lose some of the weedlessness of it. But I usually try to give them several, in the package, so they'll get 3 of the dancing bones or 3 of the 3 1/4 inch, and just have fun with it. But it's just plastics and me. What about scent? Now, I have tried a lot of scent. I got bait fuel, which is scientifically proven to work. And I know, I am, because bait fuel is scientifically proven. They have a laboratory. It just drives me nuts on scent. Do you use scent? And have you noticed a marked difference if you put garlic on it or anise or I don't know, pizza? I don't know. I haven't tried pizza, but I'm thinking maybe.
WD-40 in the old days, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that old
Mhm.
wives' tale. Use WD-40. What have you? I mean, have you? I mean, I have not seen a marked difference on
Mm-mm.
scent.
No, that
You,
that I've messed around with a lot of scent and a lot of species in my day, and for me, what it comes down to is covering up your scent. And so, I think you're better off with a little bit of soap in your tackle box to wash your hands off before you handle your lures. If you're a smoker and you're using you're tying your bait up with your hands after you've smoked a cigarette, then bait might be something that really makes a difference for you. If you are able to at least rinse your hands, I like to use the sand or even the mud as a soap to get my scent off my hands before I handle my lure. That's gonna, in my experience, go a lot longer way than utilizing scent. If you are a smoker, then yeah, I do recommend scent, or in certain cases, if you're fishing salmon with artificial spawn bag, artificial eggs of some sort, then an egg scent is definitely going to be helpful. If you're after steelhead with a corky or a spin and glow and yarn, any kind of yarn on your lure at all, if you're dipping that in some roe or sardine or whatever else it might be, salmon scent, then it's probably going to help. But for fishing Klamath, my experience tells me that you're covering up your own scent is why you're going to get a better bite. So I think you're better off trying to eliminate your scent on your tackle than carrying around. And for me, it's just too messy, right? If it gets
it is
too hot,
messy.
that thing opens up in your box.
And
I, I
have you ever spilt it on yourself?
oh yeah, I got a box out here right now that has a mess that I've been trying to clean up for 15 years. It's not coming out of there.
Nope. No, I've tried it. I've tried a lot of them. I mean, I guess if you're shooting for certain types of fish, like catfish, okay, catfish like it stinky. So, so basically you're just, when you make your own bait for catfishing, you usually take some gizzards or some livers or whatever, and you're throwing just the grossest stuff in it, and you're just stinking it up. But all this, all this guaranteed, but scientifically proven, and then get, was it power bait? Power bait always says, fish hold on 18 times longer. All right. Well, I want you to realize fish don't hang on for a whole long time. I want to know who the guy was to to time the bite and the release. I mean, 18 times longer. That means it probably held on for 1/18 of a second, and maybe
Yes, sir.
I hate that kind of stuff. And people buy it because of it. 18 times longer? That's what all power bait says. I got it on my wall. There it is. 18 times longer.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That means you could be 18 times slower in setting the hook.
And that's about taste, not scent, right? Scent's about attraction. So, the salt impregnation that I always been talking about these last few shows is that when they bite it, they think it's alive. If they get that salty taste, and so I guess I could get on board with a product that has a natural taste to it, something that when they get it in their mouth, it tastes like bait, and they do hold on to it a little longer when it comes to salt impregnation. I'm not big on power bait, but If I was going to choose a soft plastic with salt versus one without it, I would pick up that salt impregnated lure every single time. They don't last as long. That
No,
salt, yeah, it makes them
it
fall
loses
apart
it.
more.
Yeah, it loses the integrity of the bait when you
Yeah,
add
but
salt.
it's worth it. It's worth it in the long run because I mean, I'll throw the same pencil bait, stick bait with salt and without it. You know, those Z-Man products hold up a lot better in that stick bait form, but you don't catch nearly as many fish.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I just get so frustrated with all these promises, and then people, when they buy a bait, it'll say, I don't know, it's just it'll say, you know, catch, guaranteed to catch, or something like that. For sure you're going to catch this or that. And to be honest, it's all about bait presentation, as we've been talking about for weeks. It's not, when I teach somebody how to fish, you got to learn the bait. And without learning the bait, you're not going to catch any fish with it practically. So when you throw a hard bait out, it wants to be retrieved at a certain speed. It may react well to twitches, or it may not. You may, that crawfish, if you try to pull that through the water at a medium or fast speed, it's just going to, fall apart on you. It just won't do anything. So sometimes you just got to go so slow it hurts you, and that bait will do its job. Same thing with, let's say you throw a wacky worm. Well, you're not going to swim a wacky worm. You're just going to let that fall through the water. And so every technique has a retrieve personality to it. And I really find that if you understand the retrieve personality, nowadays, what I write on the back of my baits, if you buy a bait of mine now at the marina, I hand write on the back of my card how to retrieve it, because they may not know how. And if I tell you to retrieve it as slow as you can with pauses, that's what you're going to do. And believe me, it'll catch fish, but you just got to do what the bait wants it to do.
Yes, sir. You know, I haven't got to tell nearly enough fishing stories, so I'm going to take an opportunity really quick.
All right, yeah, do
So
it.
we've been talking a lot about these hard body crawdad lures. So before they took out the dams, if you got down below JC Boyle, you wanted to hit it while it was low, meaning the powerhouse was turned off during times of low energy demand. If you could get down there during that time in the summer, it's during the day when they run the river high because of the air conditioners, right? So you couldn't really get down there. You couldn't fish it at night. But so we were down there at my favorite hole, and what they called the peaking reach back then. And I was fishing with one of those daredevil crawdad lures, and just bringing it in like you always do, letting the action of the lure, do its thing, and diving down to about that 3 to 4 foot range, and then just running it back from there. And it wasn't getting any bites, so trying to start to uh, uh, introduce some action, little pops, or
Yeah.
burn it a little bit or slow it down.
Stay tuned for our continued conversation, because Ken's going to share with you of what technique he discovered and why it is so effective. So stay tuned for Terrible at Fishing. All right, welcome back to Terrible at Fishing.
So I got this technique in my head of reeling that thing down as deep as it could go, and then letting it float back up to the top, just on a dead stick. You got to stay in contact so when you get a bite, but kind of let it float back up on its own. And boy, talk about testing your patience. So the fish down there are up to 4 or 5 pounds, sometimes quite a bit bigger, but you're usually looking at about 12 to 18-inch fish. So I reel that thing back in right to where it drops off at my feet, and just try to be as patient as I could to see how long that thing was going to float up to the top. Well, I couldn't wait. I couldn't be patient on them. And when I thought it should have been up to the top, I just lifted my rod tip up really slowly, and dinged if a 10-pound trout wasn't right behind that thing at my feet as I lifted it to the surface and pulled it right out of its mouth before it bit it. And so that's that floating lure that it dives down because of the bill, and there any floating lure, if you can wait for that thing to rise back up to the top, that's a deadly technique sometimes.
Well, fish are opportunists. And so they don't, I mean, a lot of fish will catch it on the drop or on the rise. And they actually see vulnerability on the drop and the rise. And their instincts kick in. And they will go ahead and take advantage of that moment. And so when I tell people to pause their baits, they may only pause it for a second, but sometimes it requires 5 seconds on that pause. And that pause, yesterday I was fishing, and it was so funny. I was pausing it, and then, with inside of me, of course, and then I'd see this fish come up to it, a smallmouth will just come right up to it. And I'm thinking, okay, hit it. And I pull it a little bit farther and pause it again, and then he'd hit it. But people, we get impatient. My wife always accused me of being impatient. And when I bought a 69 Dodge Charger to restore, she says, there's no way you're going to be able to restore that old car because you're not patient enough. Well, 7 years, I restored that old car. And I proved to her she was wrong. But that's the way it is with fishing. You'd think with fishing, we would be more patient. Fishermen are patient, right? No. Unless you're a trout fisherman. And I don't understand trout fishermen, because you just throw it out there and then you have a beer. And it's just then by the time you're just about finished with the beer, you get a trout. I can't do that. I already said that at the beginning. I know, but trout fishermen impress me.
That's a generalization, my friend. You gotta. There's
all right, but they have a Dr. Pepper.
Well, I was thinking about trout when you talked about the pause, and
yes,
sometimes it's more than a few seconds. Sometimes it's on the order of a few minutes, and and we're talking about lures here. So, if it's waiting for that floating bait to float back up, if it's waiting for something to sink down to the bottom, or down the water column, they say about a foot per second, where you cast out and you're counting 1001, 1002 to let it get down into the strike zone. Or one of my favorite techniques is kind of trolling the current. And so if you can get positioned in a place where the current is working your lure, a spoon or a spinner, or even one of these body baits we're talking about, you don't have to reel at all. And so I in my time on the North Coast, I got really big on coho, and I could if I could set myself up in a spot where the current is at where my lure is going straight away from me, I could leave that spoon trolling in the current for any amount of time.
Yep.
And a migratory fish could come along, at any time. And, if you're letting it fall back a little bit, then bringing it back forward, or kind of jigging it up and down, then you're going to bonk them in the head with it. And, the red bands in the Keno reach will fall for that more than just about any other technique, where you're feeding it back. So I'll cast out, I'll get it in the right spot, and then I'll let it sit there for a bit. And, as the current will bring it up in the water column, and then I'm trying to let out some line to get it back down in the water column. And in that way, I'm kind of got this little bit of a parabolic retrieve where it's falling back and sinking. Then the current is bringing it back up to the surface. Then I'm letting some more line out. It's falling back and sinking. And you're really working through the strike zone with that technique, and you're kind of spoon feeding. So if they got a lockjaw,
literally,
you bonk them in the face with it, they're going to bite it.
Well, that's a nice thing about currents. That's a great thing about currents, because the current creates a headwind or a current, on that bait, and it flies in one spot, right there on the right, and you're able to move it. up and down and play with presentation. One thing I hope everybody, when they listen to our show, is like presenting a bait to a fish requires trial and error until you find what the fish wants. And it takes me, sometimes, was the last week, it took me a whole morning to figure out what the fish wanted that day. And then in the afternoon, I catch like 30. Yesterday, I don't know. With the water being so warm right now, I just lost track. I mean, people would see me fishing in my boat, not far from them, sitting on their easy chairs on the bank, and I'm just pulling them in one after another. And they're just probably wondering, what in the world is that guy doing? I mean, it took me, it's bait presentation. It's the same thing as anybody else. They're just not presenting whatever they're throwing the right way to the fish. And we could be throwing the same thing, except I'm doing it at a different speed and a different technique of the exact same bait. And it always drove me nuts when I was terrible at fishing, because I'll be sitting next to another guy and he'll say, well, do it this way. So I put my rig the same way. He do a drop shot. I'm doing the same worm. He gave me the worm and we throw it out there and boom, he gets a fish. You know how frustrating that is? And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, I got the same stupid thing, but he's doing something to that drop shot that I ain't.
Yes, sir.
And he's catching fish. It's just not right.
No, that's good old Grandpa Sandusky. You're not holding your mouth right. 90% of the fish are caught by 10% of the anglers for a reason. And it's when you get into that 10% group, you start to feel it. You know why you're in that 10% group. I've been on both sides. I can't hang a steelhead to save my life. The mythical steelhead, and I'll see old boys hang one of those things after I've been there for hours. They come in and make one cast. And so that's the entire goal of fishing in general, in my mind, is to get into that 10%.
Yep. No, and it just takes practice and practice and practice. And you kind of figure it out. One time I was fishing Lake of the Woods, and I was just using a small minnow bait with an underspin, just a tiny thing. And I was catching trout like every cast. And this guy comes over to me and he goes, what are you doing? I said, let me show you. So I I show him what I'm using. I throw it out there. I said, just let it sink. Do this. I go, boom, I catch a fish. So, so he goes out there and he tries it, but he wasn't doing what I was doing. And he wasn't catching fish. And I think it just, if we could tell anybody, it's just try different methods, different techniques, and don't be overly impatient with yourself. Baits, I mean, how fast does a worm move in the water? It's not a mako shark. So, I mean, baits, sometimes a bait requires more patience. I see people throw worms out and then they reel it in like 10 seconds later. No. Just leave it out there. Just throw it out there and let it do its thing. So, being terrible at fishing, which I was, and now I'm not, although I'm terrible at plastic fishing. And I don't work spoons like you do. I've never given them a shot, to be honest, because I'm so good at hard bait fishing. And when you're really good at one thing, you don't give anything else a shot because you're not that patient with that to learn it again.
Yeah. I think the key when you're experimenting with imparting action on any lure is the feel of staying in contact with that lure. If you are fishing with a spoon or any, in a river in general, and you're not in contact with that lure, you're probably going to lose your lure, but you're also not going to know that you got a bite. And for me, with soft plastics, that's a key, especially if you're fishing anything unweighted, is you want to impart as much action as you can, even when you're moving it slowly. But then you can't have any slack in your line, or you're not going to know you had a bite. With things like spoons, spinners, or these body baits we're talking about, hard plastics, you're always in contact with the lure because that's how you impart the action, and the weight of the lure or the resistance in the water is keeping you in contact with that lure. But anytime you're even fly fishing, anytime you're fishing with something that's lacking weight, has neutral buoyancy, or floating or whatever, you got to make sure you're in contact, and that's the real finesse of it.
Yes.
Even at times when you're drifting a weighted, like if you're fishing steelhead or something, and you have a corky or something that's weighted, and the current is putting a bow in your line, you are not in contact with your lure at that point. In fly fishing, that's what the mend is all about. Partially about presentation, but also about making sure that if you get a bite, there's enough sweep to set the hook. Because if you have too much slack in your line, there's nothing you can do with the tip of your rod that's going to hammer that hook in the corner of the fish's jaw.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, with soft plastic specifically, but with any bait, the slowest you can work it is probably the best, as long as you're still in contact with the lure.
Yeah. And I always tell people to go as slow as the bait allows you to go. So even with a hard bait, work that bait as slow as it wants to go and still work. And plastics, I think that's why I don't give it much, like a Ned rig. Ned rigs work. I mean, they work to catch trout. They'll catch crappie. They'll catch everything. A Ned will. But bass fishermen do not use Neds for one reason. Because we're not trout fishermen. You just got to leave it out there and then maybe move it every once in a while.
Somebody should tell that to Kevin Van Dam and them, who are winning tournaments with that.
Well, a good, there's always that term. If all else fails, use a Ned, because Neds work. But a lot of guys, including myself, I mean, I have a ton of Neds, but I don't use that Ned box hardly at all, because, you just got to toss it out there. And I'm like, and I paint baits. I just want to catch something I created. Let
me tell you why I like a Ned rig. When you got half a Cinco, what else are you going to do with it?
Exactly.
Everybody's got a whole bunch of half Cincos or half baits in their lure box, and that's one thing you can do with those half Cincos is throw them on any kind of jig head, really. But the Ned rigs being the most popular.
Yeah, a Ned rig's got that mushroom head that makes it stand up, and but yeah, it's I don't know, it's just one of those things. I really should work it a little bit better. Maybe in September, as the trend, as the inversion starts to happen in the lakes, I'll start working Neds. But right now, it's so much fun with topwater that I can't. I love the show. I love it when I see a bass or a fish break surface on me. And
everybody does.
Ken and I hope that we were helping you somehow today. So take care. And
pack out what you pack in.
Yeah.
Take your trash, folks.
Always leave the area that you fish cleaner and better than what you found it.